I just wanted to start by showing you a typical morning at a C&D site. We usually start with, catered breakfast with coffee and bagels, things like that. Actually, this is a picture from the groundbreaking ceremony we had when we broke up the runways at El Toro and began that process, which was a very big thing in our community. Yeah. Thanks, Rafi. This is a picture, pretty illegible, about that shows the overview of Marine Corps Air Station at El Toro. Base was closed by the Navy, sold, purchased by a consortium led by Lennar Communities, call themselves Heritage Fields. We signed a development agreement with them, and they gave us 1,000 acres of land. So the green there is 1,000 acres of land, roughly, that we plan to build a great park on. When I say we, I'm talking about the Great Park Corporation. That's a corporation that has a 9-member board of directors, and 5 of those members are our city council, and the other 4 are independent directors. This is a picture of the winning competition plan that we had. We embarked on an international design competition for what we wanted to have in this park. The winning plan includes canyons, lakes, a cultural terrace, meadows, and a sports park. You'll notice it doesn't have any runways on it. Our board adopted some planning concepts for us to follow to move towards creating this great park plan. There are 5 things listed here. One was, this are all regarding the reuse of materials on the site. One was to use as much material on the site as possible. The other one is to be sensitive to the impact of local markets. It was very interesting to me, but there are other C&D recyclers out there in the world, and they made it known to our elected officials that they didn't want to see the quantity of materials that would be generated from a runway recycling project dumped on the market, so we had to be sensitive to that. The board wanted us to minimize the impacts of trucks in the community. That seemed to make a lot of sense, and wanted us to treat the contractor as a partner instead of just another contractor that you'd hire. So we've had to establish and wanted to establish a very good working relationship. And finally, they asked us to be creative, and for us to be creative ultimately meant we had to create our own market. So this slide shows what we have there. The green is our urban quarry. Those are runways, taxiways, hangar aprons, and some roadways. Our estimates are we have 3.3 million tons of material there. So we got a lot of recycling to do. We've chosen to consider the runways as a resource rather than a liability. So we're going to use a concept that our contractor proposed to us, a concept called application engineering. I think the other speakers here will know what I'm talking about there. Typically what we're trying to do is recycle these materials in a way that creates value. So we're going to tear up the runway, which includes concrete, asphalt, base material, and we're going to try to find a opportunity to use that material on site, which means, of course, we have to coordinate with Lennar, the major builder. We have to coordinate with our city, our own city regulatory agencies, to be sure that we'll be able to use that material. And last but not least, we've learned through experience, some experience so far anyway, more later I'm sure, that if we're going to say we're going to use recycled materials, we have to demand that recycled materials are included in the project design of all development on the base. Because if we just say it, it'll never get spec'd and it'll never get used. So here's what we see generally as the benefits of recycling on the space: reduction in truck traffic, which I've also mentioned, a reduction in material costs. Those in the construction industry tell me that materials are getting more and more expensive, and so to the extent that we can create materials that are useful on the site and then truck them from one side of the site to the other rather than from 10 miles or 8 miles off the site, we're going to save on the cost of those materials. Also, another component of construction is having materials available So by doing recycling on the site, by putting a batch plant on the site, we believe we're going to improve on having materials available when they're needed for a contractor. And then finally, this is just a great sustainable development opportunity. It's something our board believes in. And more than that, you get a lot of great PR out of having a great sustainable program. There are some issues related to recycling. They were brought up by some of the other speakers, but just to reiterate, two that come to mind right away are air quality permits, Regional Water Quality Control Board permits. If I had any suggestion to the Integrated Waste Management Board, I'd suggest you work with those other guys, because we walk in there fat, dumb, and happy saying, we're doing this great recycling program, and they just whack us upside the head with all kinds of permit requirements that sometimes we think may be excessive or may not apply to a recycling program. So that there's an interesting dynamic there. The other one is the acceptance of materials by other agencies. Our contractor says that he's going to make, I don't even know what these initials mean, ASTM, a certain size of a crushed aggregate material that can be used in road base. More importantly, can be used in pipe bedding, can be used, some of that material will be able to use as aggregate in new concrete mixes. But doing all that stuff only happens if somebody will accept those materials. And we find that even in the local area, we have a large water district. They tend to not like to use, they like virgin material for pipe bedding, so we have to work with them to prove to them that we have a material that will be that we can make available that's just as good as virgin material. So there's this acceptance of materials issue. And one of the things we've learned over time is that when you're doing a C&D operation, no matter how much you hope you're going to be able to recycle, you do wind up with some stuff that's not recyclable. And so we have to figure out how to handle that. And for us, one of our challenges is we have to convince the folks who are telling us to recycle that some things aren't recyclable. So there's a challenge there. There's not a lot of that, but on an old base, underneath a runway, heaven only knows what we're going to be able to find. And then finally, the last thing that tends to not come up as an issue until one starts operations, which is that recycling operations are not pretty. They're noisy, they're dusty, you do a lot of dust control, you manage all those kinds of things, but it happens. I mean, it's great fun. Guys love all the big equipment, banging on runways and things like that. It's great fun to watch, but other folks don't like it in their community. And of course, the result of banging on those runways is we get a lot of rock. And we put all that rock in a great big pile. And then we take that big pile and we process that rock to make smaller rocks, the rocks we can use. There's lots of piles of lots of rocks, and people find that unsightly. So we want recycling, but we want it to be pretty recycling. So there's some challenges there. We just try to keep people educated. And of course, we have these artsy landscape architects who say they're going to light the piles in pretty colors. Then we might have people who want to keep the piles. So we got all those issues to deal with. So finally, I just have a couple slides. This is a breaker, and the next slide is a breaker breaking concrete. And the next slide is a backhoe picking up a piece of concrete. So that's the virgin material we're going to have on this site, 3.3 million tons of it. This is the site as it looks today, an aerial view. Lots of runway. If you look carefully, you'll see lots of RV storage. You see RVs, we see lease revenue. So we want to recycle runway, but we want to keep some RV parking as long as we can. This is where it's going to go. That's the site with the great park on it. We're hoping to see that sooner rather than later, so we're hoping within 5 years there'll be a good portion of that park developed.